roll call, please.
Okay, this is roll call for the special city commission meeting dated Friday, May 1st at 4 p.m. Benson.
Here.
Benson is present. Sarda.
Here.
Sarda's present. Fertig.
Fertig here.
Fertig is present. Hoffner.
Hoffner present.
Hoffner is present. Minor.
Minor is present.
Minor is present. Moser.
Mosier here.
Moser is present. Schramm.
Schramm here.
Schramm is present. Weber.
Weber's present.
Weber is present. Mayor Johnson.
Present.
Mayor Johnson is present. City Manager Leon.
Leon present.
Leon is present. City Attorney Denherter.
Denherter is here.
City Attorney Denherter is here.
All right, now is the time for public comments. So if there's anyone with an item they would like the commission to consider that is not on today's agenda, it'd be the time to bring that subject up. Dave, any phone calls about something not on today's agenda?
No phone contacts yet.
Brad, any YouTube comments?
There are no comments yet.
And Colleen, any emails?
No emails at this time.
Thank you very much. All right, then we'll move on to the subject at hand, and that is consideration of ordinance number 1033, which is our COVID-19 temporary emergency ordinance in light of the governor's announcement this week of her back to normal plan. And I think we'll begin with the city manager walking us through what we believe are the options before us today.
Sure. And Ross, if you'll get yourself ready to talk a little bit about the actual ordinance or the actual resolution to help commissioners better understand that vehicle. I will talk a little bit about your options. So in light of the governor's order and her back to normal plan, you guys have a number of options to talk about today. And there are more than what I'm going to tell you about, but these are the three that we see as a staff that you have opportunity to act on this afternoon. The first would be to do nothing and rely upon your action that you took this Monday evening. You did make some changes by resolution to your ordinance, and most of those changes would be impacted then at midnight that you made. Ross has indicated that he's comfortable upholding those changes if that's what you decide to do. You could modify the effective dates of this ordinance by resolution to terminate it sooner, and that could be as early as 5 p.m. today. That option requires the resolution that you have before you and leaves you the power to turn back on by resolution something else if the city, the community or county would experience a vast increase or what we're calling a hotspot of COVID-19 cases. You could also modify the effective dates of the ordinance to terminate it sooner and fully rescind the ordinance. So you'll remember that some of you had or that the ordinance had a final end date of June 8th. So you could take action to rescind it totally. What we would do is change the effective date by resolution, and then we do a first reading of rescinding the ordinance, and then you'd have that second reading of the rescinding on your next meeting, which would likely be May 11. There's other options as well, I suppose, that you could hybrid or change. We see those as sort of your three major options, and that's what you really can select from. I will say from a staff perspective, we prepared a resolution that is online that reflects option number two for you. I would also say that we continue as a staff have a lot of confusion in the community about what's open and what's closed. And then also about this action as well. So no matter what, where you act today, however you act today, we'll continue with our public education. There's a lot of folks who aren't following and spending their evenings in meetings and reading every piece of information that's put out there. So there is still a lot of confusion regarding what the original action was too. So we're working with folks and doing our best, and we'll continue to do that as well. The health board does not have a recommendation. We did not meet after your meeting on Monday. We did not meet on Thursday, given we gave you the recommendation on Monday afternoon. Ross, do you want to walk through the changes you made in the language for folks that haven't had a chance to read it thoroughly yet?
Are you talking about for the resolution that's before them today? Or the action that was taken on Monday?
Ross, I think it'd be helpful to walk people through where we're at right now,
Okay.
and then what we're looking at proceeding forward or perhaps changing things with.
All right, so currently we have ordinance 1033, which closes certain businesses for a specified period of time and also contains a gathering limitation, limiting group sizes, what we refer to as communal gatherings within city limits, to 10 people or less. Based on the recommendation of the health board, which was issued last Monday, the recommendation was to continue that ordinance until May 15th, accepting only dog grooming salons and tanning salons from that restriction. Without those recommendations, the ordinance on its face would have expired as of the 11:59 tonight. Tomorrow morning, all businesses would have been allowed to reopen and the gathering limitation would expire. Based on the recommendation of the health board, on Monday, this commission voted to extend the ordinance in its entirety to May 15th and to close the or to end the closure of dog groomers, tanning salons, and hair salons. That was one addition that this board added to the list, and those entities would have been allowed to reopen starting tomorrow. However, on Tuesday, the governor issued a new executive order revoking her prior recommendations to the citizens and encouraging businesses to reopen. And that plan gave express instructions to municipalities, to local governments, to take actions consistent with her plan, and the plan encouraged businesses to begin reopening. So that was not available to this commission on Monday. And as a result, we are all back together again to consider whether the governor's actions has inspired a change of opinion for this commission to decide whether they want to continue with the action that was taken on Monday night. Any further guidance that I can give? That was a fairly 10,000-foot view summary.
At this point, I will open it up to the commission as to whether you have questions for the city manager or city attorney, or if you want to begin a discussion of how you would like to proceed.
I have a question. I'm sorry, this is Amy Minor, and I have a question for Ross. I might have a couple questions for Ross. The governor's executive order indicated that businesses should go ahead and start to reopen. And that is the part that everybody heard. Attached to her plan to reopen are 4 criteria that a municipality will have a downward trajectory of influenza-like illnesses, a downward trajectory of documented cases, a testing program in place for at-risk healthcare workers, and then something that lands on the state's lap. We can't meet those three criteria. So my question is, are we in violation of her order if we jump the gun and reopen and we haven't met the criteria she herself has established?
From a legal standpoint, I don't know that her order has the effect of law either way. The criteria that were identified, I agree, on a statewide level, I think the case is perhaps a little overstated. But these were guidelines directed to the entire state, and the specific recommendations were for municipalities to take action consistent with the guidelines, and she herself revoked her own order that contained municipal restrictions similar to what were contained in our ordinance.
So I want you to see where I'm going with this, because this has gotten really ugly in many places around the country, and we'd be foolish to think it couldn't happen here. I certainly hope we're taking the right steps to not have it happen here. But in places where things have gone terribly wrong, and a lot of finger pointing and blame. And my question is, as a commission, if we look at the criteria to initiate the plan and we recognize we do not meet the criteria and we choose to reopen anyway, and all hell breaks loose, are we in any way liable?
That's a fascinating legal question, and there's a whole lot of people wondering that exact same question across the country right now. Headlines on news gathering sources 2 days ago reflected politicians asking for legislation to prevent liability associated with COVID-19. So that's really an open question. I don't really know how liability is going to be apportioned if it can be to anybody. If there is liability, my gut tells me it would be based upon a negligent standard of care, which is what is reasonable under the circumstances. Is our community taking reasonable steps under the circumstances to protect the public? Reasonable people can differ on the answer to that question. So that's not even, I can't even say whether liability would exist. I don't know if there is such a thing as municipal liability for failure to take proper action to slow a pandemic. I'm not sure that's an established body of law.
You know, excuse me, Commissioner Minor, very good question, because if you think about all the different possibilities, I know every one of us has gone through in their head over and over again of this, all these scenarios, and not enough information, not enough current information. But I do know that my personal feeling is we'd be more liable by shutting businesses down as far as a lawsuit that goes. That's what my personal thought is. But you know, of course, you folks know from Monday how I feel. And it's not about opening a business. It's about just letting people decide. There's many, many businesses here, and they're not going to open. Some end of May, some may not for until June. Some, but it's their choice to open up. And I've also indicated Monday all the steps that businesses have taken for the proper care to open slowly and carefully, or not open at all. So it's not about, hey, are you going to open me up? Well, you know, I just really believe that they, you know, have that choice and have been educated by watching the news and listening to the CDC. So I would make a motion, we pass resolution 20-30.
Is there a second for that?
This is Bridget Benson. I'll second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Commission discussion.
I would,
Oh, this-
Commissioner Mosier, I understand what Commissioner Minor is saying. Ross, I go kind of the opposite, and Jake alluded to it. One of the things weighing heavily in my mind is we know pretty much the majority of the communities in South Dakota are following the governor's order. If we would choose not to or stick to our ordinance, could there be legal issues with businesses?
I heavily researched that particular question on the front side of this before we had an ordinance in place. And there's a pretty good body of law that indicates that a municipality that's properly exercising its police powers does not have liability if a private business suffers financial loss as a result. That law comes from a long time ago, and what the courts did in like 1913, I assume it's probably still solid, settled law, but there's always going to be a little bit of untested uncertainty in all of this, just because the last time we had to deal with this was 100 years ago.
I have another question, I think, for Ross. Sorry, Commissioner Minor. So if we pass this resolution and rescind the ordinance, what does May 2nd look like in Yankton, South Dakota for our businesses?
If the resolution that you see before you is passed, there would no longer be any municipal restrictions. So property owners would be allowed to reopen. There would be no legal consequence for gatherings that exceed 10 people. The public would be on their honor to try to behave appropriately in light of the fact that we do still have community spread of COVID-19 in Yankton.
So if we pass this today, tomorrow, bars and restaurants could be open for business at capacity, with or without masks or 6 feet apart.
Correct.
Ross, I know, I guess I haven't heard, I should have done my research before the meeting. I know Rapid City, when they did theirs, did a capacity. I don't know what Sioux Falls and some of those have done. Is kind of what Commissioner Minor is referring to. Do we have any say in that, or because it really wasn't in the governor's executive order, that's a slippery slope?
Our police powers are amazingly broad to slow the spread of disease. So this commission would have the power to pass legislation that would limit occupancy in structures and buildings. That would be within our police powers to do. However, the scope of the ordinance that we passed, Ordinance 1033, only allows us to modify the lists of businesses that need to close and the businesses that are exempted from the 10-person limitations and the ending dates and times of the applicability or the effectiveness of the ordinance. If we want to legislate beyond that scope, we would need to have a first and second reading on a new ordinance, but that is within your powers.
Minor here. Probably getting to know me a little bit by now. Another quick question. So actually a statement. I would really strongly encourage us to stay the course. On Monday, our city health board made a recommendation. We voted 8-1 to stand with that recommendation. On Tuesday, the governor issued an order and said, here's the criteria. If you meet it, start to reopen. We don't meet the criteria. I feel we are standing in this little narrow window of time. We had agreed, if I remember correctly, on May 11th to discuss the second part of the ordinance about suggesting capacities for businesses. Is that correct? I want to focus on the word thrive in our mission statement. And we're looking at an opportunity here for, we're trying to create an opportunity for citizens to thrive, okay? And of course that means financially. And I know we have businesses that have taken a hit. And I feel like if we hold the line for a few more days here, we may already be at a plateau. Our numbers have held steady since Monday. We may be in that 14-day window. We might meet a criteria by our next meeting. I would sure feel a lot better if we met some criteria that the governor herself has laid out before we move forward in opening businesses. I know I'm going to feel a lot better if we have some say in what capacity looks like as we go through the summer. But I really think we're looking at trying to create an opportunity, getting our ducks in a row between now and May 11th, so that Yankton can have a successful, sustainable summer. I'm afraid if we just lift all the restrictions and dive headfirst into the deep end, if our numbers start to climb in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we could lose June and July, and who knows how much. We have worked so hard together to get to this moment. I would hate to see us step back. I know the voices are loud. I know the voices are loud, but I honestly believe if you take a second and think about being leaders and providing opportunities for everyone to thrive for the full summer in this town, I really think it's in our best interest to hold the line. Like I said, get ourselves organized on May 11th, talk about capacity, and move forward.
This is Commissioner Weber here. I think that makes a lot of sense, Amy. And another thing to think about is if we could form a committee with businesses and healthcare providers and see if we could figure out a plan for an opening that would be safe.
Commissioner Schramm, when I made the motion last Monday to open businesses on the 15th, my thought process at that time was to give businesses a time to come up with a plan to reopen, how they feel reopen safely. I've had many conversations, I'd say about 50 people between Tuesday after the governor's executive order and today, 50 businesses and people, individuals. And I'd say about 80% feel like they want to reopen without restriction like the governor has suggested. And the business owners I talked to say they do have a plan. They've been working diligently to come up with a plan when they want to reopen. But I had a conversation with the chamber, with Carmen Schramm of the chamber, and the chamber is actually working on a plan or a document that they can give to businesses and all the different business types that are out there on how to reopen safely. And that's being a collaboration between other chambers across the state and across the country. And that should be ready early next week. So I think there is going to be information out there for businesses to look at and reopen safely. But at this point, based on the people I've spoken with, to restrict opening to it later in the month is not going to work for them. And I'm going to have a hard time voting against going with the motion I made even on Monday because of how everyone I've spoken with. So I think we have to trust that what we've done this last month has prepared our business owners to understand what they feel is a proper way to maintain safety, if that's in the path that they're going to go down. But for us to restrict that is going to be very difficult on the city of Yankton to do for the next 2 weeks.
So this is Commissioner Sarda. Commissioner Minor, I agree with you 100%. You brought up a great point. on we don't meet any of that criteria. And because right now, so every time I read it, I have a different outlook on it. So it's very confusing what the governor is saying. But I do think that most of the businesses, if they can open, will do it according to the CDC guidelines. And the businesses, it does take them a while to get to ramp up. So, you know, is something going to open tomorrow? Well, they didn't know about possibly opening till today. So they've got to get people back. They've got to get food. They've got to do a lot of things to get ready for that. So it's not going to, it's hard to just turn on a light switch. The other thing is we learned about this Tuesday, and we can hear about something else next Tuesday that's going to completely shut places down. So from what I see we have in front of us, it would make sense to go with the motion that was made, but all the businesses in the community need to know that that can change in a few days just by either an uptick in all the cases and or the governor deciding to shut things down. That can happen right away. But I don't think we have any recourse to keep places closed from what I read, because it says we shall. So in my mind, that tells me that we have to follow what the governor said.
Jumping in here, Amy Minor, again, sorry. If in fact the chamber is working with chambers across the state and next week we'll have a document ready for businesses, I just think that lends even more credence to holding on for a minute and seeing how the chamber can work with our businesses to get them steady and ready to open. I have a question for, again, legal question, Ross. This is in the appendix 2 of the governor's order. So in the frequently asked questions, are businesses, including outdoor venues and events, allowed to reopen? She says no business was ever required to close. Businesses are encouraged to consider these guidelines as they resume normal operations and also must adhere to local restrictions. So does that give us?
Yeah, I'm still of it's my legal opinion that the action taken by this board on Monday is not anyway set aside or disrupted by the governor's executive order. This board continues to have the authority to keep it in place if you wish.
For the fact that on Monday night, we started to actually pick and choose what businesses could open up on Saturday, the 2nd, I think we're better off allowing all businesses that opportunity to open up on the 2nd. And businesses and the public have to keep in mind, we are all responsible for ourselves. We have to make the decisions that are best for us, but with other nearby communities opening up as well, I just think it's in our best interest here in Yankton to go ahead and follow the guidelines provided by the governor and move forward with an opening on the 2nd.
This is Commissioner Mosier, and a couple of things I guess I was jotting down or thinking. One, and Ross or Mayor Johnson, correct me if I'm wrong, the ordinance resolution that Jake made and was seconded still allows us, or it keeps the opportunity in place to shut things down if we have to. And I would give that kind of conversation, or for those in Yankton online listening to this, we know potentially some dark days are in front of us. We're not through this. We know that this could extend. We also know it could extend for well into a year or so, depending on what happens in the medical community as tied to COVID. So I would just use a word of caution that while we're telling businesses they can reopen, I think or would hope that a lot of businesses would not take that lightly, knowing that if we get a hot spot or if numbers drastically raise, that this ordinance is still sitting there and can be reenacted. None of us want to do the bunny hop, but I just bring that up because I do think it still gives us the opportunity to control our community if the need should arise. And then I would say to those that are in vulnerable populations, as Commissioner Benson said, some of this is putting onus back on the people. And they're going to have to make decisions that are best for themselves and their families, to protect their families. I said Monday, and I'll say it again, just because if it's voted through, we give businesses the opportunity to reopen. If they're not ready, don't. Just because businesses reopen, if you're not comfortable or you have an underlying condition, then protect yourself. I mean, I think we have to give some of that onus back to the business owners and back to the people. I would say, as well as Commissioner Schramm, I talked to quite a few businesses, and a lot of them said they're going to go, there's no cases tied back to their business, to their industry. So that gives me some hope too, that they can put their own rules in place for their business. Some of them have talked about even more cleaning, extra cleaning, and mixing things up even while they're allowed to reopen, because they don't want to put people in danger either. So that gave me some good cause and hope too. And then if the chamber's backing that up with information, I think, to me, we have to give them a chance.
I would just like to follow up on the vulnerable population. One of the populations that's most vulnerable has absolutely no choice in the matter, and that is residents in our long-term care facilities. And we have people coming and going in and out of those places working. And so if we're going to, again, look at the health board recommendation, pass the resolution, and then on Friday, lift all restrictions, those people do not have a choice. There's nothing more they can do to protect themselves. I think we're asking for trouble.
So this is Commissioner Sarda again. So every time a question's asked of this Ross, city attorney, I get a little more confused. So do we or do we not have to follow this? If there is a outbreak and we can actually enforce it 3 weeks from now because there is a huge spike, what's the difference then versus now? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Either we have to follow it or we don't.
Okay, so 2 questions there. The first is, do we have to follow it? This commission is not bound to do anything necessarily. It was a firm directive or guidance for the state to follow, and most similarly situated communities are taking some form of action similar to what you see in the resolution before you. That doesn't mean you have to. The second part of it, the resolution before you, Amy described it as, I believe in her summary at the beginning, you're turning it off, but at any time between now and June 8th, you have the ability to turn it back on up until the end date of June 8th. And it is my recommendation to this commission, you may want to consider doing a first reading on a similar ordinance, and then just leave it on the table so that after June 8th, since it looks like our peak in greater South Dakota may be late in June, perhaps sometime in July, having a similar ordinance that you could do a second reading on and make effective in short order after June 8th. But you have the ability to take what we have now, turn it off by the resolution you're doing here, effectively saying the end date is the end of the day today. All businesses could reopen tomorrow, but if there's a spike in 2 weeks, you could reconvene, or perhaps on May 11th, you could pass another resolution making it effective again until as late as June 8th. Is that cleared up for you, David?
Yes, it does. Don't know that it makes the decision any easier.
Ross, Commissioner Ferdy, and that can be done turning it back on in a short time of what, 48 hours?
As long as it takes to call a special meeting properly under the laws and have this commission vote. It's a resolution. It's not a new ordinance. It doesn't require a second reading.
We need 24 hours to publish notice of a meeting.
This is Commissioner Mosier, and a couple questions I got that I think somebody referenced earlier, but I don't know if it's been answered. I've been asked, what does this mean for events, community events? And two, what does this mean for organized sports?
I think that probably falls on me again. If the commission passes the resolution the way it's written and attached to the agenda, there is no further restrictions on gatherings of any size. So there would be no municipal restrictions on any sort of organized athletics. It would be on each individual club or on the city as an organizer for recreational programs as to whether and how and to what extent those are allowed to continue, but it's not going to be a restriction by city law.
In terms of our programming and facilities, we'll be working on phased plans with different triggers that would enact different levels of response. We've just started those conversations this week after understanding that things might change here for us in our community. So we'll have those for the activities that we're involved in, but a lot of activities are leagues that utilize public facilities, but we don't organize, we don't, host or monitor any other time. So they would, set their own parameters. Certainly the city would help educate best practices and point in the direction of resources, just as we will, regardless of how you move forward with your resolution or your action today. We'll continue to do what we've always done, and that's educate businesses, help educate businesses, have conversations with them to help them develop their plans. We will point them to the state's resources and share with them if they contact us, just as we've done. And same with event organizers. We've had people call us and say, I've got a birthday party or a family reunion planned. It's this date. What do you think? We're giving our opinions based on what we have in front of us for CDC recommendations and the information that we had presented regarding our peak times. Those things are, changed, but we will certainly help folks like we do with everything and help guide them to make their decisions. And then we'll have criteria for our programming, our facilities, et cetera, but waiting to see where the commission leads us here.
Minor. Oh, sorry. Hoffner, you going?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I kind of like to hear from the public. I think we take all the time up and we get enough time, make sure the public has enough time to weigh in. That's my thoughts anyway. We kind of keep talking the same thing over and over again. But I'd like to hear from the public.
Can I say one thing before we hear from the public? You guys are, a lot of you are parents. I'm a teacher. I absolutely hear you and believe when you say the vast majority of businesses are going to do everything they can to comply. I don't know why we would rescind our opportunity to deal with the ones that don't.
Any more discussion? Otherwise, we will ask for the public comments. Dave, any phone calls?
There have been no phone calls.
Brad, any YouTube comments?
There are several. Corey Kitch says, praying for all of you to be spared from harsh, unfair, and irrational criticism, praying that you will be gifted with all wisdom you need to lead well. God's grace to you. Chuck M says, our community back up so we can get on with our lives and purpose and put this media-fueled frenzy behind us. Thank you. Levi Williams says, praying for the commission and our community. God grant wisdom to you and unity as we fight this together. Jamie Riken says, please be kind. They are in a very difficult position. Dawn Cabela, Studio D, says, agree. Tina Wilson says, if criteria is set, we should follow it. You look around Yankton, and at any given time, you see so many people out shopping and not even keeping the 6-foot rule. Why, as business, would we want to open in 2 weeks and be shut down just to wait to the 15th and do the right thing of the community and the workers? Craig K says, perhaps it would be wise to let the business owners make their own decisions as far as capacities. It seems as though commissioners are trying to micromanage. The commission could be liable because we don't meet the requirements. You shouldn't wield the power if you don't shoulder the responsibility. I'm thinking the governor has the right plan. Gary Pigney says, please let business owners make their own decisions. Our businesses do not run on your fears. Our freedom and rights do not end where your fears begin. 14,000 people in Yankton, 27 infected. That is a 0.0018% chance of being infected. We are holding at 27. The city commission is not offering any facts for any argument on either side. Again, fears cannot be allowed to run policy. Do we not all have common sense enough to protect ourselves as we feel needed? Do we need someone else to do that for us? Pauline Rhodes says, do what other cities are doing, please. You listened to the governor before. Please do the same now. Why wouldn't you? Thank you. Mason, our business will be responsible. Did the commission authorize Ribfest to proceed? Kayla Kolda says, I believe Sioux Falls is not until another week and is not for capacity with social distancing in place. Indeed, we should follow the guidelines from the governor, and we are not in that place yet, as Minor has stated over and over. Follow the health board recommendations and your governor's recommendations. Jeannie Sakavati says, let business owners decide. Let's get back to work now. Haven't we been preparing since the day we were closed? I don't think there is anything else we can do. Lincoln Waltner says, I hope our city commission members can make wise, good decisions for making the right decisions for how our city should proceed for opening our city back up, again, slowly, and should not rush into things. Dawn Cabela again says, the South Dakota Cosmetology Board is saying they will not be setting new guidelines as a cosmetologist. I am not comfortable with that. Has nothing to do with fear, it's facts. Tina Wilson says, I agree with Minor that we stick to the 15th and then we have time to make sure we are ready. Our people are trained to do things when we open. Levi Williams says, if businesses are open or churches, what is allowed occupancy? How can they operate in an appropriate plan without that guidance? Kurt Bernard says, thousands of people are out and about daily. You just go see the big boxes. Everywhere outside the city is wide open. What's the point in keeping only Yankton City closed then? Listen to the governor. Cherie Hoffman says, if you open the community back up, will you all be meeting face-to-face at your next meeting? Chris Anderson says, please consider the cost of reopening and then closing again for businesses, especially restaurants with perishable inventory, employees being brought back and then laid off again. Lisa Azell Davis says, there is no vaccine, everyone. Testing is not happening yet to a level to protect workers and patrons. Businesses are affected. Yes, keep the ordinance too early to open up. Katie Redrick says, I'll be a responsible business owner and follow the health board's recommendations, considering salons cannot follow CDC guidelines 100%. I won't be the business that is a hotspot for the next 2 weeks. Someone using HS as their name says, when considering how people are at bars, how are people going to expect to maintain a social distance? Bars are a mass gathering and an exception from other small businesses. Need to look if there are a few more have come in here. Molly Wallenstein asks, will City Hall be opening its doors? Karen Fendrick says, did the community survey results get shared? If they did, I would like to see if the city opened up before the 15th. Craig K says, some could say that once commissioners have been able to exercise power, they are reluctant to relinquish power. And Restore Church says, thank you, city commissioners and leaders, for all you do. You're in a difficult spot, as are many, many prayers for you, wisdom, discernment, and encouragement. And those are the comments I have right now.
Thank you, Brad. And Colleen, any emails to share with us?
I have one email that was received earlier this afternoon, and it states the CDC, President Trump, and Governor Nome have all stated that a downward trend needs to be in place before reopening can occur. There is no downward trend as needed for the reopening process. There should also be a decrease in cases. Yankton County is up by a case from yesterday, and there is not a decrease in South Dakota. Governor Nome has stated that local governments have control of their own communities. For the health and welfare of the community, and under guidance of the city's health board, the city commission should take into consideration those factors, the factors from the CDC, and stay closed.
Thank you. Commissioners, more discussion?
I just want to be clear. So I think I can feel which way the wind is blowing here. So all of our health experts, City Health Board, Doug Ekron, Dr. Pietola, everybody that we've asked to speak has indicated that we're likely to see a surge of cases mid-June, late June, mid-July. And the earlier that happens, the less likely we are to be able to manage that. And so on May 1st, as a collective body, we're going to opt to rescind all guidelines. Is that what we're doing?
Ross, that is correct, right?
If you vote in favor of the resolution that is before you, you would effectively be shutting off the current ordinance. There would be no local restrictions unless you turned it back on before June 8th.
I have some thoughts to share before we proceed to vote. And yes, this is not the first, nor will it be the last time I say this. Each day, we are doing the best as community leaders to respond to the health, economic, and political realities of the COVID-19 pandemic. Each day, we know a little more, process the changes happening around us, and determine how to proceed. This week, Governor Nome announced a back to normal plan, the name of which I think is mistaken. It should be back to the new normal plan because it gives people the idea that we can go back to how things were before March and all this transpired. And as we've all said, I think today, if people do that, if businesses and individuals do that, we will be enacting an ordinance to restrict movement and commerce in our community again. That will happen. So in her plan, in Governor Nome's plan for the state, she has an executive order that local governments follow it. And in response, we've seen other cities remove or loosen restrictions. And that includes Sioux Falls. They had a first reading today of a proposal that would open up their bars and restaurants to as many people as will fit in there, as long as they keep 6 feet between parties, for entertainment and fitness facilities, they would have a 50% occupancy cap. So Sioux Falls, as we all know, has been the one hotspot we've seen in the state, and even they are going a long ways to loosen their restrictions. Mitchell opened up their businesses on Wednesday. Watertown has let their emergency ordinance expire. Rapid City is reopened with restrictions. I believe Spearfish has rescinded its emergency ordinance, and the list goes on. In the meantime, here in Yankton County, we've seen the number of active known COVID-19 infections hover around a handful at a time for a while now. And I think many of us sitting here believe that that number has stayed low because of the precautions we've mandated in our community. But with these precautions have come an economic toll that is not shared by all. It has affected many small business owners, some of whom agree with the measures we have taken, and some of whom deeply oppose them. For commissioners, this trade-off has weighed heavily on our consciences. And sometimes this feels like a public health versus an economic health argument. But of course, in truth, we know that these two items cannot be pitted against one another. They must go hand in hand. And in light of the governor's announcement this week and seeing what our neighbors are doing, we are faced with another situation where we need to figure out how we work hand in hand with them and not in opposition. Some will say that's a lack of leadership given these circumstances. However, I believe that it is the leadership that we need to show now to get us closer to figuring out how we live with COVID-19. This will not be the last time we consider these issues, and I think we're all painfully aware of that. But we must remain nimble to react to what we're seeing happening around us. We've got to learn from others, and we must press on and do our best. And I believe the option before us today does that. We heard the governor in her press conference on Tuesday announcing the plan talk about testing. They currently can do 3,000 tests a day. They're ramping that up to 5,000. There are differing opinions on what sufficient testing looks like, but she believes that is sufficient for our state. She's increased the contact tracing efforts. They've hired many people additional people to undertake those efforts, which is reassuring. And she says she's confident that we have enough hospital capacity in place to handle whatever the peak, both in Sioux Falls and outside of Sioux Falls, brings us. Now, I know even on the commission, we probably have differing opinions as to whether her description of our preparedness is accurate or not. But that's what she's telling us. And that's what many of our fellow cities are going forward believing, or at least hoping that her assurances are indeed true and accurate. She has said that if there are hotspots in counties, she will take action to restrict business and movement there, similar to what she's done in Minnehaha and Lincoln counties. So, I think many here are aware of the fact that I'm on the city health board and how I voted on Monday. And I think that's the purest distillation of my beliefs on this issue. But as I've said, we have to acknowledge the entire picture beyond public health and engage with the economic and political realities around us and do the best we can. This has been hard on all of us because these two subjects are very personal to people. You have people's health and their livelihoods. And so when they're expressing their opinions, they're usually very heartfelt. And that has been, I think, really painful for a lot of us to experience as we try to figure out the right way forward. And so where I stand will be with Jake's motion, which is, again, to remove the restrictions, but keep the ordinance in place through June 8th, so that if we need restrictions again, we can easily do it in one meeting with the resolution. And then I also hope that there's an appetite amongst commissioners to have the first reading of a new ordinance that would be enacted after June 8th. So it would be an empty vessel again in case we need it, in case of emergency as things transpire. So that is where I'm at. Is there any more discussion? If there's not, I will have Al do roll call.
Okay, and this is roll call on resolution 20-30, which changes the effective date to May 1st, or after this meeting, actually, and keeps the regular ordinance in place should there be an appetite to do any changes between now and June 8th. Ross, do you agree with all that? Guess Ross isn't going to weigh in. We'll start with roll call.
Hey, Al, excuse me, Al, the timing, it wouldn't go into effect until midnight, correct?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was trying to talk, Al. I didn't realize my microphone was muted. Yeah, the ordinance, I'm sorry, the resolution modifies the ordinance to effectively open everything tomorrow. So while you have the ability to open it up as of 5 o'clock today, for purposes of keeping things clean, the way the resolution is drafted, if you pass it as written, things would open tomorrow.
I guess that brings up a good subject, and I'm sorry to do this now, but the idea of a midnight open time, I am a little worried about maybe some bars opening at midnight and people being very excited to celebrate. Could we extend it to 2 a.m. perhaps?
This is Commissioner Sarda. I don't see anyone opening it up at midnight. I don't think I would worry about it.
All right, well, if there's no more discussion, then Al, please proceed.
Okay, we'll do the roll call now. Minor?
Knowing full well that we meet none of the criteria that the governor has set up for reopening, I will be voting no.
Minor is a nay. Mosier?
Mosier, aye.
Mosier is aye. Schramm?
Schramm, aye.
Schramm is aye. Weber?
Weber is no.
Weber is no. Benson?
Benson's aye.
Benson is aye. Sarda?
Sarda, aye.
Sarda is aye. Fertig?
Fertig, aye.
Fertig is aye. Hoffner?
Hoffner, aye.
Hoffner is aye. And Mayor Johnson?
Johnson is aye.
Johnson is aye. I believe I got everybody. The end vote is 7-2 to pass resolution 2030.
Well, before I ask for a motion to adjourn, I just want to thank all of you assembled here. Despite the pressure we've been under for a long time, and that pressure will not end anytime soon, we have all kept our cool and dealt very humanely with each other, and so I appreciate that. The other thing is I just want to remind the public once again that while things are opening, this is not a return to normal. This is a new normal, and I would highly encourage people to continue practicing social distancing, to practice good hygiene. I know I don't plan to probably go into crowded areas, indoor areas anytime soon. And I think there are a lot of us like that. So, you know, in order to keep things open, we need your help. So please be responsible. With that, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
Benson, so moved.
Sarda, second.
We have a motion and a second. Al, can you do roll call, please? Al, I think your mic is off.
Yep, it was. Okay, I'll start over. And this is a roll call on a motion to adjourn. And we'll start with Mosier.
Mosier, aye.
Mosier is aye. Schramm.
Schramm, aye.
Schramm is aye. Weber.
Weber's aye.
Weber is aye. Benson.
Benson, I.
Benson is aye. Sarda.
Sarda, aye.
Sarda is aye. Fertig.
Fertig, aye.
Fertig is aye. Hoffner.
Hoffner, aye.
Hoffner is aye. Minor.
Minor's aye.
Minor is aye. Mayor Johnson.
Johnson is aye.
Johnson is aye. Motion to
This
adjourn
meeting-
passes 9-0. I'm surprised that nobody wanted to continue.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good weekend.
Everybody have a good weekend.
Aloha.